Okay, so I'm gonna go on. So yeah. So we have seen the different quality criteria for carbon certification, for the finances, the strategy, and now we're gonna just have an overview of what are the carbon markets today, what are the main indicators in terms of volumes, prices, etc. So today, the demand for carbon credits is still divided into these two categories. So compliance demand, actors who have regulatory constraints to reduce their greenhouse gases, and voluntary demand, those actors who buy low carbon credits independently of any regulatory constraints. In the middle, we still have this carbon certification supply that can feed both sides of the demand, but the categories have evolved a bit. So we have new climate policies and we have new carbon certification standards. So on the compliance demand side, so we had previously the mechanism from the Kyoto Protocol, and now they have been replaced with other compliance mechanism, but under the Paris Agreement. So this is, the mechanisms are called the Article 6 mechanisms. I'm going to come back on that. But just like the Kyoto Protocol, there is a possibility for the states to exchange emission reduction units, credits, so that they achieve their NDC. So NDC is the nationally determined contribution. And there is another scheme that is not directly under the United Nations Climate Convention, but that is also on a regulatory scheme. This is I4CE. This is the offsetting scheme for aviation operators. So they are kind of the same demand in the sense that they are regulatory demand. Then you still have the regional emission trading system, but you have a lot more than previously. Currently, there are something like 30 regional emission trading systems in the world, all with different rules, different prices. But there is a median price that is still under 20 euros per ton of CO2. So this is quite low. And in the recent periods, there was China also launched its own emission trading system. And this is the major one, obviously. And one last type of compliance demand, I've put a French example. We have an obligation of offsetting for domestic flights. So there is I4CE for the international flights. And so there is an obligation for aviation operators to offset part of their domestic flights in France. And this, for example, can be done with credits from the label bas carbone. That at the beginning is a voluntary standard. This is to answer Donald's previous question. This is a case where you have compliance demands that you can achieve, that you can answer with voluntary credits. And there was the same kind of offsetting regulation for coal-fired power plants that were opened again last winter. Then on the voluntary side, so we still have the same kind of actors, but there are more national voluntary markets that have been emerging. So like national rules for voluntary markets. And this market is approximately 250 million tons that were sold in 2022. I will come back on that. And the prices may vary between 1 to 100 dollars, but well, the average price is approximately in 2022 about $7 internationally per ton. So we do have all kind of layers and different schemes with different prices and scopes in the compliance and voluntary demand. And And we also have new standards that emerged, and especially domestic standards like the Label Bas Carbone, or in the UK, the Woodland Carbon Code. I'm just going to say a few words on Article 6. So Article 6, so this is Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and it is close to being fully operational. So there was like what is called the Paris Rulebook with the operational rules that was adopted at COP26. And now there are still some technical aspects that are under negotiation. But so the objective is to enable the states to trade emission reduction units so that they optimize the allocation of the resources and so on. And also, there is the objective that it could become a source of revenues for developing countries to finance their low carbon development, just like the Kyoto Protocol. So there are two different schemes in this Article 6. One is 6.2. This is about cooperative approaches between states. So this is the transfers of emission reduction units that are called internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, ITMOs. So this is basically agreements between states. And there are already some countries who have signed for those kind of agreements. So, for example, Japan, Switzerland, Singapore, they have signed with a lot of countries in the developing world, so in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, to buy credits from them. And then you have 6.4, which is called Sustainable Development Mechanism. So these are also ITMOs. But the whole scheme is going to be completely supervised by the United Nations Convention for Climate Change. So this is really the equivalent. It's 6.4. This is the equivalent of the Clean Development Mechanism and joint implementation under the Kyoto Protocol. And so there are quite a number of rules that are being established around that, and especially rules to avoid double counting between the countries. So the idea to avoid this double counting between countries is to have corresponding adjustments. So corresponding adjustments, there are like accounting movements between the greenhouse gases inventories on the country. So concretely, when a state where a project, a low carbon project that is being certified, so this is the host country of the project, if this country agrees to sell the emission reduction to another country or to an aviation operator under a compliance regime, it has to subtract to its own inventory the benefit of this emission reduction. It can't count for it because it's selling it to someone else. So this is how to subtract it from an inventory and to add it to another one. An important thing is that Article 6 does not regulate voluntary carbon markets. So corresponding adjustments are not required for voluntary markets. But the Paris Agreement left a few doors open. So it left the door open for the states eventually to buy from voluntary carbon standards, but it still means that there should be a corresponding adjustment. And voluntary carbon buyers could, in theory, they are allowed to buy carbon credits generated under Article 6 scheme. But then it means that they have to find a country that is okay to authorize the export of its emission reduction. And just for you to know, the European Union has decided so far, at least, not to use Article 6 flexibility, which means that as a so we count as a country, the European Union, so our nationally determined contribution, we should achieve it on our own. And we, a priori, won't be buying credits from elsewhere. Okay. Do you have any questions on this first picture? before I go into more details about the volumes and prices and yeah, Saverio?
Right. And I'm not sure that for the corresponding adjustment is not valid for the voluntary carbon market. For example, and the new framework carbon removal regulation of the Europe say that this carbon credit is we can use this carbon credit certificated for the objective of the LULUCF regulation for the the 310 million tons of the objective of Europe in LULUCF regulation. For this motivation, I think that if we generate some credits in Italy, for example, and sell this credit at buyers that is in France or in Germany, we have to not account this carbon credit for Italian inventory respect of the for the convention of climate. Do you have some reference where I can see that we have not used the corresponding adjustment in the voluntary carbon market?
Yeah, so well, the Article 6 and the whole Paris Agreement is not supposed to rule voluntary carbon markets first. This is more like what I was calling like a door left open. But in the CRCF case, it's actually, so we don't have individual country contribution for the Paris Agreement. We do have a European national, but which is like regional, regional determined contribution. And so anyway, no matter who is buying the certificates from the CRCF, they will be accounted for in the European determined contribution. So they will actually stay in the host country in the way that anyway the host country contribution contributes to the European contribution that goes to the next step. So no matter who is buying it, including inside or outside Europe, it goes to the European contribution. So if a German buyer is buying an Italian afforestation credit under the future CRCF, that will go in the Italian inventory. I mean, if the Italian inventory is sufficiently, is able to see it, because this is another problem. And it goes to the European contribution. But the German, the German buyer doesn't have to ask for Italy for an adjustment and everything. This is just for the Article 6. And anyway, Europe won't be using Article 6 for that. So these are really distinct frameworks. So there will be no adjustments with the CRCF within the frontiers of the European Union. And even if you would have, like, I don't know, for whatever reason, you have a US buyer that want to buy French credits or soil carbon in agriculture, well, they can just say that they contributed to the European or the French inventory, the improvement of the French inventory and the European determined contribution. But this is the only thing they can claim. And actually, this is more or less what we're doing with the label bas carbone. So we're saying like anyone who is buying label bas carbone credit is contributing to France determined contribution, that is to say to the European level. But so there will be no adjustments on this side. They will belong to the host country.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand for the transaction in Europe, for example, because the objective of is not for one nation, but the objective is of the Europe. But if I sell the credits at outside of Europe, what I have to do?
Well, you have to warn your buyers that you're selling them a contribution to the host country mitigation effort. So, because Europe is not accepting and has never been, even under the Kyoto Protocol, to actually export emission reduction in other countries, which is also a reason why none of the voluntary carbon standards settled before a recent date in the European Union, because it was clear enough for Europe that they wouldn't be exporting, they wouldn't make any corresponding adjustments on their inventories, they wouldn't artificially add to their own emissions to get finance from somewhere else. So, so the claim is different. You can claim that you're contributing to the host country mitigation efforts, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. I'm gonna go on. So, what about the voluntary carbon markets? So how did those markets evolve? So you have a graph at the top that shows the evolution of the volumes exchanged on those markets. The data are from Ecosystem Marketplace. They do like a yearly report on the state of voluntary carbon markets. They have been publishing that for some years, and this is a major reference if you want to get some data on those markets. About the volumes first, before analyzing them, you have to be cautious about the numbers, because what they show is the volume of credits that was traded. It doesn't mean that they were all retired. Doesn't mean that they were finally bought by a final user, like a company wishing to actually use it. A great part of the transaction that you can see here are actually made by brokers, by intermediaries, not always by final users. And it's usually estimated that actually half of the transaction are actual final users, and the rest of it is intermediaries. So what you can see here is you have a first phase from 2005 to 2012, which is kind of a growth, a slow growth in the volumes, and this is the first phase of the Kyoto Protocol. Then from 2012 to 2020, this is actually the second phase of the Kyoto Protocol. But what you see is a decrease in the volumes, because actually the second phase of the Kyoto Protocol was not ratified due to a lack of signatures. And this actually sends a negative signal for the markets. Then 2015, you do have the Paris Agreement, and onwards you see more significant growth again. And what happened was that there was an increasing number of companies who defined carbon neutral strategies for them on a voluntary basis, and who started to buy big volumes of carbon credits. For example, you have General Motors, Barclays, Microsoft, Walt Disney, who started to buy. Then in 2021, you have really a record-breaking year, where the volumes between 2020 and 2021, they doubled, and they reached more than 500 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So what happened exactly on that year? Well, you had new big companies entering the market with enormous volumes to buy, and especially in the energy sector. So you had like Shell, BP, Total Energy, banks, investment funds, that kind of active. You also had in 2021 a new demand from the digital sector. And there was like this crypto blockchain initiatives that bought an enormous amounts of credits. So they were initiatives called Token or Klima DAO, but that was more of a speculative demand rather than really final uses of credits. And then in 2022, you have a drop in the volumes traded. We just halved, we're back again on the previous trends to 250 million tons of CO2. How can this be explained? So some of the major buyers that came out. You had some from the aviation sector, like EasyJet, some from the energy sector, like Shell. And you also have a change in the approaches by the voluntary buyers. You have actors that are committing to carbon finance in a different way than before. So a lot of them are now buying or they're pre-funding projects. So they started to build the project right at the beginning before it started. So it doesn't exactly translate like in this traded volumes. So you have newcomers, you do not have only, so you have the very big ones who left, but then you have a lot of newcomers who buy less credits, really smaller volumes, but with really higher prices. And so this leads me to the table at the bottom. So you see that between 2021 and 2022, you have a sharp increase in the prices of the carbon credits. So we were at something like $4 and it went to $7, which is enormous. I mean, the prices remain really low, but this is an enormous increase for those markets. Because for years, that was between $3 and $4 per ton. And most of this increase in prices, it comes from projects that are called nature-based solution projects. So projects in forestry and agriculture. And we're going to see that afterwards, but the agricultural part has really grown on those markets. So at the end of the day, this increases in prices helped to maintain the value of the whole market, because although you do have far less volumes, with this increase in prices, the market remained in 2022 around $2 billion approximately. And then if we want to have like a look in the future, what are the perspectives, we might expect that in 2023, the volume and the prices are going lower again, especially because there were these scandals I was mentioning on avoided deforestation projects due to the lack of additionality. And these projects are a lot of projects on the voluntary carbon market. But on the longer term, the market is really expected to grow a lot. So there are a lot of perspectives, and not all of them were really done in a good way. But just to give you a number that might be of the more not so unrealistic, some perspective proposed that in 2030 the market could reach around 1.5 to 2 billion tons of CO2, so 2 billions of CO2 compared to the 250 million tons that we have today. So yeah, these are really an enormous growth to be expected. One other important fact about this market is that the number of credits that are generated by the project, this is called the issuances, they are significantly higher than the number of credits that are really used, retired from the registries, which means that there is an enormous surplus of credits so far. It's probably in part a temporary situation because the demand is expected to grow, so the difference should be reduced with time. But still, for years, it has been, it's the situation, the current situation. And then at the same time, one of the paradoxes is that some market operators estimate that the credits that are available on the market are of a lower quality than what the buyers want. So true, there is a surplus of credit, there are enormous amounts of credit, but then there are not enough credits of high quality. And this is what the buyers want in the current situation, which is what we were seeing on the previous slide with a smaller market with higher prices. Then who is behind these transactions? What are the standards that certify the credit? So in a few words, just a standard, this is the organization that is like designing the requirements and the protocol for the project holders to certify the low carbon activity. They also designate who will be the auditors to check if the project is respecting the requirements. So on the voluntary carbon markets, the two main private standards are VERA, so VCS, or Verified Carbon Standards, and Gold Standard. And just to give you an idea, so the VCS was founded in 2006, 2007 by actors that were close to the World Economic Forum. Those were like the mainstream standard, to say it in a quick way. And then you have, mirroring this, you have the gold standard that was founded by NGOs, including WWF, and that started to certify not only the climate aspect of the project, but also more general sustainable development goals. And then you have the UN Climate Convention with the Clean Development Mechanism, for example. And on top of that, so yeah, I've put the numbers from Ecosystem Marketplace, but then I allowed myself to introduce also at the bottom of it the label by carbon, just to show you how little it is in terms of traded volumes compared to the rest of the standards, compared to Vera and the gold standards. And actually, it's not exactly the same scope for the label by carbon, because this close to 600,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, this is actually it does include pre-funding, so kind of ex-ante credits, which is not the case for the other standards. But that was just to give you an estimate of the volumes. And then if we look closer at what kind of projects are exactly financed in this international market. So we do have this 250 million tons sold in 2022 at an average price of $7. But behind this $7, you do have major discrepancies. And again, the data is from Ecosystem Marketplace. So what you can see here on the left is that the project category that sells the most, that is the most transacted, is on forestry. And more specifically, it is RED projects, so avoided deforestation projects. And a small part of it also is afforestation projects, but it's really a minority. And the second type of project is renewable energy. So what kind of renewable energy? It could be hydropower plants, wind fields, and these are mostly occurring in China and in India. It's usually the cheapest projects, what you can see here with the prices, and also the less qualitative projects. Third column, this is industrial processes, so making industrial processes more efficient, less emitting. Then you have what is called here household community device. These are the improved cook stoves that I was talking about before. So these were more of a development projects that was right at the beginning of the carbon certification schemes. Then waste disposal, these are landfill gas management projects. And the last column is agriculture. And actually, this is a new category. So in the previous report, you couldn't see it because it was funded with the forestry and land use category, but it has grown a lot, and in particular since 2020. There was a big increase in the number of projects, and although they are still really small in terms of volumes, it has grown a lot. And what kind of project is it? It's mostly sustainable management of grassland, and in particular in Asia. And the prices for that kind of project is really high. But I'll come back to the agricultural projects. Yeah. Now, if we focus on the prices, so I'm just comparing here the average prices for credits sold internationally and the ones from the label bas carbone to show you how different it is. So the label bas carbone is selling its carbon credits at approximately 34 euros per ton of CO2. And this is more or less 5 times more than the average price on the international market with its $7 per ton. But what you have to remember is that there is a great differences in prices, both at the international level and for national standards. So it goes from €1 or dollar to more than 100. And it's really that there is no prices, there is no market prices on the voluntary carbon markets. I mean, it depends on what you signed for with your finances. These are really negotiated over the counter, so it really depends. But to give you a few insights on what are the determining factors for the price. So the localization obviously is important. It's not the same to make a project in Brazil than in France. The kind of certification you have, for example, a certification like gold standard that also implies some co-benefits certificates might be more expensive. The category of activities, this is what we were seeing in the previous slides with the different category of projects. And the vintage is also important. That is to say, the year of emission of the credits. Because buyers do prefer recent credits. No one wants to buy 2025 credits on renewable energy, especially. Then the co-benefits are also a factor. And this is becoming each time a more important factor. So the value, I mean, you can value more a credit that has co-benefits, and it's becoming, and the gap is becoming increasingly higher between projects that don't really have co-benefits and projects that do. Another factor, the volumes of credits you purchase. So obviously, if you buy 10 tons, you will buy the ton like at a higher price per ton than if you buy 1 million. And also the number of intermediaries. So we've seen that a lot of the transactions are between brokers and so on. So depending on how many commissions you do add in the process, the price will be different. And then I just put a few numbers from a publication that is called I4CE Carbone, I4CE in France. So each year we do have kind of the same, this is kind of the same as Ecosystem Marketplace, but for France. And so just some numbers from that report that was published recently. So there are approximately 2.4 million tons of certificates that corresponds to the number of potential certificates. I mean, so you have projects that are validated, and it should account for 2.4 million. It doesn't mean that in the end they will all be there, but it's the idea. And all those projects, there are so 815 projects that were validated, and most of the projects and tons actually generated come from afforestation and reforestation projects, forestry side. And on the agricultural side, they come from the carbon and green methodology, which you're familiar with. So which is a mixed crop and livestock mitigation methodology. And on this whole bunch of projects, that's nearly 200 projects so far that are 100% financed. And so this is about the bunch of projects. And then if we just take a year of transaction, in 2022, there were 567,000 credits that were sold at an average price of 33 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. And last thing about that, this was just to make a quick comparison between agriculture and forest projects at the international scale and at the French level, just to show that it's quite a different picture. So at the international level, most of the forestry credits come from avoided deforestation projects, so what we call RED projects. And then you have afforestation and reforestation. And then last, some improved forest management, but it's really a few projects, and they're mostly in Asia. And you see that the prices are around $10 to $15 per ton. Then on the agricultural, so the grassland and rangeland management, so this is the last bar of the left graph, you have these agricultural projects that are mostly in Asia. And so this is mostly about improving grassland management. So switching from intensive grazing to more rotation systems and so on. What we can't see yet is that there is another methodologies from Vera that will be about soil carbon that has, I mean, it already existed, but it was revised. And now there are a lot of projects that came in this new methodologies, but we can't see it yet as traded credits, but it's going to happen. And then on the French side, so these are not the most recent numbers, but I didn't have all the data for the most recent years. So, I mean, it has grown a lot. So contrary to the international side, in our case, most of the projects on the forestry side are afforestation. Obviously, we don't have avoided deforestation. And on the agricultural part, most of the emission reductions that were traded were on the livestock methodology. And there's another methodology that was validated in 2021 for crop fields, and that we can't see in this graph because that was too recent. So what you can see is that you definitely have different types of projects and obviously really different prices between these two voluntary carbon markets. Okay. Do you have any questions on this part?
Yes, Clotilde, I want to ask, when you compare this, because in Belgium, for instance, you got prices offered by, for instance, clear CO2 of 50 euros per ton. I heard about other companies in other countries also launching prices between 40 and 60 euros per ton. That is comparable with your 34 euros per ton that is in label by carbon?
Yeah, I guess you do also have like transactions that will be a lot with a higher price in France. So these are average prices, and the thing is that really we don't have I mean, this data, it comes from the operators that sell the credits. These are the ones that answer the Info Compensation Carbone questionnaires. But then we don't have the detail for it. So yeah, you might find some transactions that are actually like with prices that are a lot higher, but the average remain around 30 euros.
But the same sources, they say that we will end up in a few years above 100.
Oh yeah, well, I hope so, because yeah, this remains quite low, obviously. What we can also add on that is about the prices of the projects. So, for example, we know that for the crop field methodology, so the ones that are about the like increasing the soil carbon and so on, we know that the price of a project is a lot higher than the 30 euros average price that is offered. We know that we are around 70 to 80 euros per ton, approximately.
The reason why I'm asking is when you are talking to farmers, they say even the 50 and the 60 is far too low to compensate all the efforts. So it starts to become a little bit more interesting when you come more closely to 100 or a little above 100.
Definitely.
So that's a little bit, we are in a situation there, hoping to create something, but as long as the prices are not sufficiently high, there will be some hesitation, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you.